Hey everyone, so the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to create something called a shell script that is going to let us automatically download copies of our data at different intervals, okay? So the idea here is that because we're dealing with quote unquote real-time data that we know updates every 10 seconds or so, we probably don't want to pull it every 10 seconds, that would be quite a lot. But if we want to be able to compare what's happening over time, one thing we know is that actually the URL always stays the same, and every time and anytime we reload it and it gets updated, it just replaces the data that was there before. So if we want any kind of historical record, we're going to have to download lots of copies of this data. Now, obviously, we could do this by, opening the web page every hour and then copying and pasting the data into a new file, but obviously that's also pretty tedious. So what we want to do is be able to create a script that's going to run that's going to be able to run at a set time interval and download copies of that data for us. So the way that we're going to do this is using something called a shell script. And a shell script is just another type of text file that has a .sh extension for shell. And it's going to look a little strange because the shell scripting language is different than Python. But if you just sort of stick with me here, I think you'll see it's a pretty straightforward thing to do once you kind of know what you're doing. So since downloading data from a target web page is at a regular interval is something that you may want to do in a lot of cases, you can just keep this script basically and modify it to point to the correct URL that you want, and also to create the file names that you want. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. And as usual, I'm going to save it in such a way that indicates it as a shell script. So I'm going to call it data downloader.sh. Okay. And now, as I've mentioned in the past, we're going to there's for loops exist in basically every programming language. So I'm actually going to use a for loop in this case, but I'm going to create a for loop with what's known as an iterator. And an iterator which is conventionally denoted by the letter I. Again, an iterator, this I is a variable, so it could actually be anything. Again, could be fluffy pink bunnies if we want it to be. But the way that we configure an iterator is basically we give it three parts of the conditional. We give it three parameters that explain how to run this loop. So what this is shorthand for is saying for, right? So again, that's our for loop. Instead of saying for something in something else, what we're saying is create a new variable, start its value at 1. It's weird because it kind of hops here. The I++ means increment the value of I by 1 every time you go through the loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this is the stop condition, which says keep going through this loop as long as I is less than 6. Now, what this is going to do is give us a loop that runs 5 times. Why? Because we start at 1, then we get to 2, 3, 4, 5. At the end of that fifth loop, I is going to equal 6. And because we've put a strict less than here, it's going to hit this condition. It's going to say, oh, I is 6 now. Drop out of the loop. We're done. Okay, so again, a little bit different than you're probably used to seeing it. This is the kind of loop structure that we see in languages like C and JavaScript as well. So this is something you're going to see around. It's just different from the way that you do it in Python. And indeed, there are different formats of for loop you can use in different kinds of shell scripts. This is just the one that we're going to use here. So again, the syntax is actually relatively easy to understand. It's saying, during this for loop, do the following things. And in this case, we're going to use a command called curl. And what that's going to do is it's going to let us copy the contents of a URL. And there's a parameter for curl, which is -o. O is where we get to specify the name of our output file. And so that output file is in specifying the name of the output file, I can also specify the path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by saying JSON data with a / because that's the name of the folder, of course, that I want my data to go into. And then I'm just going to give it a sort of descriptive name. And here's another trick, is that I can refer to the current value of that variable I by using a $sign, right? So what this means is just the same way that we say for a row in City Bike Reader, right? The variable a row refers to the current row. In this case, this is going to be a way of saying whatever the current, that $sign means whatever the current value of I is. So what I'm going to get is a sequence, I should get at least, is a sequence of files that are named City Bike Data 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And then again, I'm adding that .json extension because of course my Python script is looking for anything in this folder that has a .json extension in terms of what to run the script, what to process, right? And so now the next thing I need to add here is just the target URL, which of course is going to be my station status, right? Okay, and that's actually pretty much it. So that's going to do all of the things that I need it to do in terms of running it multiple times. However, I obviously don't want to, if I were to run this now, it would run it 5 times right in a row. Okay. So it would just do it instantly one after the other, which isn't going to give me that interval that I need. So just as an example, I'm going to put in here the parameter sleep 10. So sleep is a really sort of sweet little function that just says, wait, right? Just go to sleep, hang out for 10 seconds, and then run the script again. And that's actually it. I put in this done. So this is just a way of saying we're finished. And now with any luck, we're going to run this and we'll get what we expect. Okay, so all I'm going to do is pop over to terminal here. I'm in my folder. I do an ls. You see, I can see my shell script that I've written here. I can see my JSON data folder, which is the folder that I'm trying to put it in. I'm just going to say sh datadownloader.sh. Now, if you're wondering what you're looking at here with this output, this is actually giving us feedback on how the downloads are going. So what it's saying is the total amount that I should expect, the download rate that I'm going to see, what the current speed is, what the size of the file is, and the percent that has completed. Now 10 seconds might have been, I'm not actually sure this is 10 seconds. I guess I could check. I guess it is 10 seconds. Anyhow, so what we can see is we can actually look at these JSON files once they've opened up, but this is showing us the progress of each download, right? So the pause that we're seeing is that sleep command. You can tell that it's separate commands being run because the speed that the download is changing. And again, and of course I can come here and I can look at my JSON data, and here are my JSON files. So we can check and see if there's actually a difference here. It looks like the first two were a little too close together. Probably I ran it right at the beginning of the window. So you see that the timestamp here is actually the same. So obviously, you know, realistically, I wouldn't necessarily use this particular, I would probably use a longer window than 10 seconds. But what you can see is that if I want to be able to run a script at regular intervals to produce multiple copies of the data, I can do that. Now, we can also set this up if I wanted to do this continuously. I could set this up with something called a while loop. There's a bunch of different ways to kind of slice and dice this. But the overall point here is that if you need to do a regular download of data, you can absolutely configure a script that's going to do that for you while you leave that terminal window running in the background, so that you can not have to do it manually. Now, in a real, you know, in sort of in a newsroom setting, of course, you wouldn't do this just generally on like a desktop computer. You could do that. I mean, it would work just fine. Typically what you do is you would set something like this up on a server with something called a cron or a chronic job, which does basically the same thing. It lets you set with a very particular detail exactly what date and time things are going to be run, but they function basically the same way. So whereas this one, it depends on when you start it, what the precise intervals are. Cron jobs you can set up so that it runs at particular dates and times. But again, this is just to illustrate that it's actually very straightforward to create a script that downloads something at a regular interval and creates distinct file names and puts them in a folder. And of course, again, we now have the tools to process just whatever files are in a given folder, as long as they match a certain structure. meaning that we can start to think about processing real-time data at scale very, very efficiently. So that's it for this. I will see you all in a few days.